those who don't know history are doomed to compare everything to Hitler. That's a quote by Lou Perez.
Yeah.
And looking at that quote made me think about the latest article that you wrote about the anti-Semitism in Ireland.
Yeah.
And I suppose woke accuse everyone that disagree with them on any subject of being a Nazi, essentially, yet they also simultaneously are the ones with the most anti-Semitic narratives and attitudes currently in the West. What do you make out of all of it?
Yeah, I love that quote. I saw that quote from Lou Perez somewhere, and I thought, damn it, I wish I had thought of that. I agree with it wholeheartedly. Yeah, the anti-Semitism thing at the moment is particularly striking because it's coming from the left. And whilst I know that there's anti-Semitism is a sort of universal phenomenon, and it doesn't belong to any particular tribe, political tribe certainly, but it's really, really driven on by the left at the moment. Although, of course, it also exists on the right, more in the fringes, and the obsession with the left in refighting all of these noble battles from the 20th century, from the fight against fascism and Nazism in Europe to the fight for civil rights in the United States, the fight for gay rights in the United States, all of these causes that have become these shibboleths and these like myths, really, in the imagination of people who think of themselves as educated and informed and politically active. They seem to have developed an emotional attachment to them, and they need to perceive themselves as fighting, as continuing on that fight. I mean, there's even a slogan in Italian political graffiti. This is the fight continues, la lotta continua. It's this perpetual revolution, I guess, idea. But so the awkwardness of the anti-Semitism coming into that is that because Palestine and Arab Islamic and Arab resistance movements have such a long history with the far left in Europe, with going back to the 70s and terrorism and throughout the European continent, that they've kind of blended in together. And it's really remarkable to see that these people who really do think of themselves as the inheritors of the partisans and the resistance movements of Europe are simultaneously, inching ever closer to, to really bloody and scary anti-Semitism. It's really kind of wild to see, and it's just a total lack of self-awareness.
I think from my point of view, I was born and bred in Poland, and I don't know the history of Israel particularly well, but I know Polish history relatively well. And a lot of what we are seeing on the continental Europe right now, and including the British Isles, it does remind me of like mid 1930s of situations that I've read in books, because the anti-Semitism wasn't really coming initially from top down. It was the sort of the resentment towards their success, for example, and towards the perceived success that they had was very much almost like a grassroots movement fed by propaganda. But nevertheless, initially it wasn't coming from top down. And I think a lot of sort of the really unpleasant situations we've seen mainly on X, because BBC doesn't like to show these type of things, is very, very alarming.
That was my thought when I saw that video that I wrote about last week about the incident in the restaurant in Dublin. And the incident was an Israeli man was in Dublin. He said on his social media that he was there for work, and these two women approached him as he was sitting in a restaurant and started screaming at him, saying, you aren't welcome here, Zionists aren't welcome here, fuck Israel. And then one of them spat on him, And it turned out it's even worse than that. There's screenshots that he shared that showed that they were following him throughout the city. It's unclear how they came upon him in the first place, but the upshot of it was he was spat upon. And honestly, the first thing I thought of were those famous photographs from Austria, where they had Jewish women out scrubbing the side, the road as an act of humiliation, and the Austrians were spitting on them and urinating on them. And I mean, obviously, that's 10 times worse than what this one individual did in this restaurant in Dublin. But she was just happened to be a lone person who shared the same vitriol and the same kind of urge to humiliate as those people did back then in Austria. And I don't think of it. I mean, it's interesting. I wonder if I would call it a movement. I'm not an expert either, but the anti-Semitism that it was in Europe was almost like a shadow, like a Jungian shadow. I would see it as a psychological or spiritual phenomenon more than I would see it as a political phenomenon, until it was harnessed, of course, for political purposes, which it was. And now it's sort of almost the other way around. I think it is actually starting out as a political manipulation tool, but it's catching. It's like it's like a brush fire that shadow that's always been there in the European imagination of, like, secretly it's all the Jews' fault. These two things are meeting, and it's extremely worrying. I mean, I'm not Jewish. If I were, I would be intensely concerned all throughout the UK and certainly in Ireland. I mean, Ireland, it's funny because I have an American accent, but I was born here and my father was from here, and half my family is here and half my family's in the States. And I went to school here. I went to university here. I know this place very well. And my dad would always say, like, Ireland never really had an anti-Semitism problem. And I know that some people would argue with that, but compared to the rest of Europe, it certainly didn't have a great, illustrious, heroic past with saving Jews during the war or anything, but it wasn't the worst of the nations. So it really feels to me, anyway, like a surprise, a very nasty surprise, to see how quickly regular Irish people have turned on Israelis, but really Jews. I mean, I have on multiple occasions in regular conversations with utterly normal people who I don't know. We're not like at meetings for political purposes or anything, just social occasions. I've had people say to me the most horrifying things about the Jews. Mm-hmm. Just like, and I don't know what to say. I'm like, I've never heard anyone express racism toward people of color the way I have heard hatred and violence wished upon Jews by ordinary Irish people in conversation. So yeah, it's really, really disgusting. And the essay I wrote was very vehement, and it was quite angry. It was a bit of a screed, but it was genuinely felt. I feel very, very disappointed and very demoralized with this particular little island nation. I mean, actually, technically, I'm in the United Kingdom and I'm in Northern Ireland, but the professional managerial class of Northern Ireland, whilst there's more Israeli support here in Northern Ireland than there is probably anywhere else in the UK, because we have this loyalist community that supports Israel. But in terms of my peers, my demographic, my milieu, whatever you want to call it, people who, have who are educated and work in arts, for example, uniformly across the board, Israel's committing genocide, free Palestine, and it's not a subject you can even have a conversation with anyone about, because it's not really about what it says it's about. It's something else entirely, and I don't want to go there.
You know what? I do actually think that it's not really about the victims, for example, in Gaza, or people that have died, because if it was, the same people would be persecuting Russians on the streets. And I don't want any Russians being persecuted on the streets, just like I don't want any Jews prosecuted on the streets. But if that was all that it was about, waging war, for example, we would see Russian people being targeted by the same mob, but we don't really see that. There was I think initially when the war broke out, there was a little bit of sort of unpleasantries, but overall there was still a lot of sort of defense towards the Russian people, understandably. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
know, um, Russians living abroad have got nothing to do with, whatever Vladimir Putin has come up with
Yeah,
in terms of his sort of geopolitical aspirations. But there is just this ongoing double standard wherever we look. And something that you said earlier on about the 1930s, mid 1930s being wars because like they were like publicly humiliating people, it was a bit more spread. I agree with that, but what I find today a little bit jarring is that today our human morality seems to imagine that we could never do something
yeah,
like what was happening in Nazi Germany, what was happening during the World War
yeah,
II in Poland. We have this sense that it was done by our ancestors that were somehow less moral than we are. And
completely.
I don't know where that comes from. Do you get any idea, like any sense? Why is it that we think that we are different to people that lived 80 years ago?
I think it's yeah. So I hadn't really thought about it before. Well, actually, no, I have because to me, it's like we've got this split reality, the way people perceive themselves and society at the moment, where part of it is like on the macro scale, everything is everything. Am I allowed to swear? Everything is just everything's messed up. Everything's fucked, right? Like the planet's burning, and like oh my god, Trump is in office. Like everything's a disaster, and like there's hardly anything redeemable, and humans are the worst. And yet, on a personal level, it's like, oh, aren't we so much more sophisticated and so much more enlightened than our grandparents or our great grandparents? Like it's weird. I'm like, those things don't really compute. You'd think if we were the world, so there's a sense of like blaming the past for everything and not seeing anything good about the past or any wisdom in the past or any virtue in the past, and yet we're the virtuous ones. And this is very particular to the liberal progressive mindset. I don't see it on the right, which is not what the right used to be when I was a kid, but let's just for simplicity's sake call it the right because it's an opposition to the left. um, so but fundamentally that's almost like a year zero mentality. It's very disturbing to me. I've always had this like this hearkening back to the olden days. I've always been very interested in the olden days, and even when I was a little girl, I used to when I didn't want to play Barbies, I wanted to like play Little House on the Prairie or like some game that was like historical. All my invented games were about history, not reality, not the present. So I have the opposite where I'm fascinated by the past. But that's why no one in that worldview, that liberal progressive worldview, can see themselves as they could possibly be a bad actor, unless you're talking about whiteness, in which case then it's all of it, it's all on the table. But as opposed to a political opponent, they cannot be the bad actor because they are in possession of the set of ideas that automatically gives them a free pass to enlightenment. It's like automatically I'm superior because what do you mean I'm an accidentally turning into an anti-Semitic Nazi? Look, I'm a lefty. I can't possibly have that. Like I can't possibly be that. So it's this complete split. It's like there's no integration between, there's no continuity between the past and the present. There's no integration between the dark and the light within each one of us, which, like it's a very interesting question because you say, would no people feel like they wouldn't be these ancient kind of murderous human drives don't apply to them, but of course they do. Of course they do. They apply to all of us. We're all fundamentally human animals. None of us are exempt from these like primal drives that
Mm-hmm.
we all evolved to have, including murdering, killing, and being vicious. We just live. We're very, very lucky that we live in a society that's really sanitized that out. It seems to be
Yes.
driving it into really weird shapes and forms, which is still better than murderous mobs on the street. I'll grant you that, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's a healthy sanitization.
If you enjoyed this clip and you would like to support the show, all you have to do is press subscribe. And to watch the full conversation, you can go right here. I'll see you there.